Hey. Big day around here at DawgsHQ and on Dog Walk Talk. As we record this on August the 10th, my colleague here, my partner in crime at DawgsHQ on the team beat side, Palmer Toms, broke the news today that Georgia will allow recruits to attend the world's largest outdoor cocktail party in Jacksonville. Hasn't happened before, Palmer. I'll give you the floor, man. What's going on? What happened? And what can we expect to see in Jacksonville this season?
Partner in crime, what crimes are we committing, Wes? The only crime is folks not calling it the world's largest outdoor cocktail party.
That is a
which
crime.
You so rightly did. But as it relates to the Georgia-Florida matchup in Jacksonville, Georgia will host recruits in 2022 down at TIAA Bank Field.
Who even knows what it's called anymore? That stadium has been called so many different things. I don't even know.
It has gone through quite a few iterations of names, but Georgia will host recruits. That's what we do know, and that is a change from a precedent that had been set previously by previous athletic directors. So here's the deal. Back in 2012, the SEC allowed for teams in the conference to host recruits for non-conference and conference games at off campus at neutral sites. Georgia Florida is the only game in the SEC is one of several games played traditionally. Forgot there about Texas A&M and Arkansas playing at Jerry's World in Dallas every year. And obviously when Oklahoma and Texas make their transition into the league, that'll add another non-on-campus neutral site game into the mix as well. So back in 2012, the SEC allowed for teams to host recruits, give tickets to recruits for neutral site games. That's what I mean by host. When I say host, I don't mean the traditional sense of hosting where players are allowed down on the field, coaches can talk to them. This is strictly limited to providing tickets. And it is also limited to just the home team. So when this rule went into place back in 2012, Georgia Athletic Director Greg McGarity and Florida Athletic Director Jeremy Foley reportedly agreed to not do so. They did not want to bring student athletes into the mix, potential student athletes, prospective student athletes into the mix down in Jacksonville because there are NCAA rules that could be violated there if off-campus contact were to be made. Well, obviously, McGarity and Foley have both moved on from their positions. We've now got Josh Brooks at Georgia and Scott Strickland, not the Georgia baseball coach, the Florida athletic director down in Gainesville. And so Georgia, being the designated home team for 2022, will exercise its right to host recruits in Jacksonville. Again, no contact can be made between Kirby Smart, his staff, and the recruits, but they will be able to provide tickets for recruits and their families to attend the world's largest outdoor cocktail party.
Look, Kirby hasn't hid how he feels about this. He hasn't been shy about it. Anytime he's got an opportunity to talk about it, he's told people that he wants to move the game. He wants to make it a home and home so he can host recruits the way that he thinks about hosting recruits, not just giving them tickets. Now, the timeline is interesting. You mentioned McGarity moving on, Foley moving on. This is the first home game for Georgia under Josh Brooks. So that timeline kind of checks out. But, people are saying this is a compromise. Georgia and Kirby are, they finally got their way here. But to me, it doesn't really feel like they did. This feels more like a Band-Aid, more like, if anything, a baby step towards the inevitable if Kirby can keep knocking on the door long enough, or maybe he just doesn't end up getting his way. But, I mean, if you're Kirby, it doesn't seem like this is ultimately the outcome that you would have chosen.
No, this is not the ultimate outcome that he would have chosen. In an ideal world, he'd be able to host recruits in Jacksonville. He'd be able to, have Georgia play Florida in Athens on occasion. But ultimately, I think in a perfect world, from a Georgia perspective, they'd be able to host recruits in Jacksonville and still play the game in Jacksonville, thus bringing in the money. But because NCAA rules prohibit that.
Kirby's never said that, and it's maybe because the NCAA rules don't allow it. But Kirby's never, in any public comments he's made about this, he's never said, "Well, let's just have it in Jacksonville and try to get the NCAA to change the rule." I mean, that doesn't even seem like it's on the table or like he's even thought about it.
A couple years ago, it was on the table. Georgia, Greg McGarity and Kirby Smart brought it up to the conference at SEC spring meetings. But as Smart pointed out to us, the media, who's going to support this outside of Georgia and Florida? Maybe Texas A&M and Arkansas, because that game comes to mind. Now you might have Oklahoma and Texas on board. But you're not going to see Alabama and LSU hosting, recruits at a neutral site. They play all their games, on campuses. At least their rivalry games. They're not going to, you're not going to get the support of those teams that wouldn't benefit from it. Ultimately, they would understand the implications that it would have on them, and ultimately, it would probably help. It would benefit Georgia and Florida, and it would not benefit the rest of the world.
Yeah, I mean, the way that college football is headed with conference expansion, everything that comes with that, right? NIL, more rights for the players, more freedoms for the players. I just don't see how we're headed anywhere but in a few years, Kirby getting his way, and maybe not because he's the one that banged on the drum so loud, but with the NCAA and its power, I don't know if it's diminishing, but there does seem to be some sort of momentum for the SEC and the Big Ten and whoever else to want to do their own thing. And if that does happen, I don't know if it's going to, but if it does, the NCAA rule about not hosting recruits isn't really going to matter anymore. But everything's changing so rapidly in this sport, in this game. Like, nothing's changed in a couple weeks, and it feels like it's been 10 years compared to how quickly college football evolved over this past summer and over this past year. So there's no telling, where this rule is headed, where any of this is headed. But for now, it is something. It's something. It's something for the South Georgia football players. And Kirby knows about that. He was one of them. He was a kid that probably wanted to go see Georgia, Florida on Georgia's dime or on Florida's dime. And now those kids get to do it. Their families get to go do it. But they don't get to talk to Kirby. They don't get to hear Kirby say, "Hey, see that picture of Trayvon Walker right there? Jacksonville Jaguars #1 overall draft pick. I coached him." That kind of stuff doesn't get to happen. So I don't know what the ultimate outcome of this is. I just know Kirby probably just feels like, okay, cool. We get to have some guys watch the game. But I wish I could talk to him.
Yeah, and I'll reiterate this as we kind of wrap up our thoughts on it. Georgia has hosted, provided tickets to recruits for off-campus events before. I think back to the Georgia-Clemson game this past year. Neutral site in Charlotte, both schools were able to provide tickets to their prospective student athletes because that is a non-traditional neutral site game. Alabama and Miami did it this past year as well in Atlanta. Georgia and Oregon are playing in Atlanta, and there's a good possibility that that's going to happen there. But because this is a traditional neutral site game, Georgia, Florida, in Jacksonville for the foreseeable future, Oklahoma, Texas at the Cotton Bowl, other neutral site games that we've brought up here, traditional rivalry games that are held at neutral site fields. The designated home team gets to provide the tickets. Not both teams every year, but both teams will have the ability to do so. Now, Georgia has chosen to do it starting in 2022. Whether Florida follows suit in 2023, we'll have to wait and see. I would imagine that they probably will, because Kirby Smart, Josh Brooks have forced the hand of Billy Napier, who may be in agreement with Kirby Smart here. I mean, they come from the same coaching tree under Nick Saban. He may be in agreement here, and he may not be all too upset about Georgia forcing Scott Strickland's hand. But I would be very surprised, shocked probably, if Florida did not follow suit in 2023. But what we do know here is that Georgia will have recruits in Jacksonville in 2022.